Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello. Hello, hola, ¿cómo están? Si hay más gente allá atrás, que venga adelante. Welcome. Mi nombre es Mikey Cordero, one of the artists that curated this space, La Sala Libre. My project, Diasporican, is featured in this room. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, hay tiempo. Antes que, no, después. Yeah, check it out. Y este espacio, you know, we created it for, you know, conjunto, lo que está pasando, you know, un concepto que está pasando por ahí. We wanted to kind of take advantage or co-opt tanto gente que viene para acá, you know, especially from the diaspora. And we think it was important that people coming from diaspora have a space to reconnect, to connect, to educate themselves, and really get in align with local movements y lo que está pasando aquí, right? Entre eso, we wanted them to also feel at home, porque muchas veces la gente de afuera viene aquí y no se sienten like they're from here. And we discuss that here, you know, and we have conversations about that here. And my project is also in part about that, right? Like, what does it mean to come home and to feel like you're home? So, you know, we wanted to create this space como si era una visita de tu abuela, right? You can come in to visit, hay café, la sala está abierta, everything's going on in la sala. And yeah, and just take part, share, and just be together, you know? Que es lo más importante ahora mismo, you know? Today we have a dope conversations, part of our like Sala Chats series that we've been doing all month. We started July 31st, and we've been open every weekend from Friday to Sunday, and we're going all the way up until September 14th, right? So right in line with that other concert that's happening, right? So the idea is that this is como un pregame, you know, antes que el concepto que viene aquí, you know, hanguear, con un cafecito, and then go to the concert. So that's the space. And Sala Chat today, I think, is a really important conversation that has to do with that. Ni de aquí ni de allá, right? Diasporican identity in motion, co-presented by CENTRO, who also has a project, Diasporicans and Artists in Motion in New York, really giving the highlights and spotlights to Diasporican artists and their work. So today, that's the conversation. I'm very excited about it. We got Vianca Vélez leading this conversation and hosting. She's now at Represent Justice, pero lo conocen por todos lados porque she's in every bomba group, every bomba video. A really, like, you know, in terms of Diasporican identity, I think she has a strong grasp about that, coming from New Jersey, right? Tenemos Dr. Yomaira, who's director of CENTRO right now. Keishla Rivera-López, and Brianna Ramos, right? You want your middle name? Alvarado Ramos. Oh, okay. And she comes from the Diaspora Collective. So it's a dope group. I'm very excited that they blessed us with their presence. And yeah, can't wait to hear. Is that enough, Vianca? Yeah? All right.
Yeah. Me cogiste un ching ahí. Thank you, Mikey. Thank you for inviting me to the space, and thank you to all of you who are here this afternoon with us for this conversation. As Mikey mentioned, the conversation today, ni de aquí ni de allá. Of course, the resistance in me is like, no, espérate, soy de aquí y soy de allá. But we're going to get into that. I'm going to ask the panelists here to briefly introduce themselves, and then we're going to get grounded in what the topic of this conversation is, and the theme of this conversation with a piece by Keishla, a little poem piece. So first we'll do some introductions, and then we'll get into it.
Hi, ¿cómo están? Buena, qué bueno estar aquí con ustedes. My name is Yomaira Figueroa-Vásquez, and I'm a writer, I'm a teacher, and I'm a professor of Africano, Puerto Rican, and Latino Studies at CUNY. I'm also the directora of CENTRO, el Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños in Nueva York. El Centro is the oldest and largest research institute, repository, and archive of the Puerto Rican experience in the diaspora. We have the largest collections. We also have an incredible team of have a staff of almost 90 people. We do work in obviously Puerto Rican studies, data, research, arts, culture, education. We're doing a curriculum right now, K through 12, and college education on Puerto Rican studies. We're just really excited to be doing this work. And CENTRO was founded in 1973, so we're 52 years old. I think it's something that we should all Puerto Ricans should be really proud of, the insurgent history that created that space. And we have some folks in the room who were around when that was going down, and they're still deep in the struggle. Digna. Our survivor. And I'm so happy to be here with you today. And
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Keishla Rivera-López. I'm a scholar, writer, and poet. I just finished a fellowship at CENTRO, so that is my relationship to the organization. I was a research associate there where I researched on Bad Bunny, archives, and memory. And I'm an incoming visiting assistant professor at Haverford. She explained what CENTRO is, so I'm gonna move the baton. But I am part of the people who are excited to be a Jersey Boricua.
I think I'm the only non-Jersey Boricua on this panel, but it's okay. Hi, everyone. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm from Pittsburgh, so it's still cool. My family's from Orocovis and Morovis. My name is Brianna. I'm a member of the Central Committee of the Diaspora Palante Collective, which is a grassroots organization founded in 2022 to educate, agitate, and organize the diaspora for the liberation and the independence of Puerto Rico. I'm also a co-coordinator of the Zone of Peace campaign. It's the U.S. NATO Out of Our Americas network, understanding that the U.S. is the #1 threat to our region, both in Puerto Rico, but also across Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm happy to be here with you guys today.
Yes, give it up for the speakers. And to Mikey introduced me, but I'm Vianca Vélez. I am the communications and narrative director for an organization called Represent Justice, which represents a community of formerly incarcerated storytellers and empowers them to build narrative power to challenge the dominating and harmful narratives around mass incarceration. Outside of that, I'm a Bomba practitioner, and I think that's really important to mention because Bomba is one of our deepest, oldest, and most meaningful traditions, Afro-Boricua traditions that exist from Puerto Rico and across the diaspora. And so I think that is one of the driving forces for me to be a culture bearer and a cultural preserver, and dig deep into what it means to be Boricua and to understand our ancestral lineage. And with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Keishla, who's gonna ground us in some beautiful words that kick us off for diaspora identity.
Thank you. So I'm not going to read the entire piece. This is an excerpt of a recently published poem. It's in the Acentos review if you want to read the whole thing. It's called Diaspora Dream, which I think is very fitting for the conversation. I have a dream sometimes that feels more like a nightmare in the dead of the night. Like a ghost trying to devour me, a feeling trying to overpower me, a dream where Borinquen is emptied. Poured out, her people go sporadically, like a wastebasket flipped upside down, the contents disperse up and down throughout the eastern United States. A move that is rationally sound, choosing between the cold in the north and the sun of the south that resembles the Caribbean's. Something warm enough to hug your spirit, an embrace that somewhat feels like home. Borinquen spills into the Caribbean Sea, the waves of diaspora transporting people back and forth like a game of tug of war, a rubber band that always brings you back, even temporarily. Because you see, they don't truly want to leave. Se van allá afuera because they believe a better opportunity awaits them there. Because they've been displaced by hurricanes and Airbnb opportunities, environmental catastrophes, tourist economies that erase incrementally what is Boricua about Borinquen. It removes vital pieces, Puerto Rican people and culture from the island's ecologies. But made a point to return. Puerto Rican people, of their pride, of their resilience, of alcapurrias, rellenos y frituras, sancochos y arroz y habichuela, of coquis singing in the campos, roosters and cows calling you to arise at dawn, of beaches with cerulean blue waters, clean and free, of illegal privatization and gringo power, of the hues that fed and shaped our bloodlust for generations to come. A place for us to return to, a place to call home. Thank you.
That's beautiful. So with that, I'm going to start us off with the question, what does it mean to each of you when you hear ni de aquí, ni de allá in the context of diasporic identity, based on your upbringing, based on your experience as a diasporic Rican? And anybody that wants to start can start.
I first want to mention, as you guys see, my name is Kufia, and I feel like I'd be remiss to start without recognizing the diaspora of Palestinians that have been displaced from their homeland, that are fighting against the ongoing genocide that we must continue to support against. I feel like for me, what it means to be diaspora, and similar to what your poem, kind of acknowledged, is this idea of forced displacement. I think that a lot of times whenever people talk about the diaspora, it's as if it was a choice. And while, it might have been a choice for our parents or our grandparents to get on a plane, it wasn't their choice to leave because of lack of access to opportunity and all of these different things that, again, were manufactured for us to be able to be forcefully displaced. And I'll get more into, I think, a little bit of the main point that I want to make around diaspora resistance and what the role that the diaspora has played in the fight for the liberation of Puerto Rico. But I think for me personally, like growing up in Pennsylvania, it was a very isolating kind of society in terms of there were no Puerto Ricans around. There was hardly any Latinos around, actually. It was a lot of white people that I grew up with. And I think just kind of always feeling othered from that end, and then also feeling othered here in a lot of different ways. But I think, I similar to you, I just kind of been like, well, my family's from here. I come from here, and I'm not going to let somebody else dictate what my experience like as a person in this world is. Also with that understanding that being diaspora means you were forcefully displaced from your homeland. And so just doing everything that we can fight to get back is important.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really incredible about your experience growing up in Pennsylvania. That is very different. I mean, Puerto Ricans have so many different kinds of experience in the diaspora. The ones that are more well-worn are like, the New York and Chicago, maybe Philly, Hartford, right? These other places, or these like larger cities, right? But then the experiences of Puerto Ricans in other states and that are kind of more far-flung, it's what we know less of. And it's really exciting for me to be able to encounter folks from different parts of the diaspora and share in those experiences, right? Ese desahogo. For me, I grew up, my parents are from Caguas, here from the Barriada Morales, and from Vega Baja, from Los Altos de Cuba and Almirante. And they went to Hoboken in the 70s, and Hoboken in the 70s was a city that had the largest population per capita of Puerto Ricans in the diaspora, and they were systemically removed from that city through a deadly cocktail of arson and intimidation. There were over 500 arson fires from the 1970s to the early 1990s, and there were over 60 deaths. The majority of them were Puerto Rican children and babies. I'm writing about those fires now and doing public projects around those fires and trying to honor that memory as well as remove the veil of shame. I think that has a lot to do with who we are as a people and the question of our dispersion and our diaspora from this place. I sometimes get really tired of the el discurso de ni de aquí ni de allá, como que me cansa, Because like you said, yo siempre digo, yo soy de aquí y de allá también. Because me puedo mover en los dos sitios. Because I can move well in those spaces. You know, your body adapts. That cartography of your movement shifts the way you behave, the way you act, the way you can talk with people. And I think we're going to get into the kind of move of diaspora to Puerto Rico and what that relationship looks like. For me, it's always been very clear since I was a little kid. Mommy would always say, not only did no hablamos inglés en casa, solo se habla español en casa y tú puedes hablar inglés en la escuela. Y además tú lo vas a aprender en la escuela, porque aquí no lo vas a aprender porque nosotros lo sabemos ya. Pero más allá de eso, para mí, mami siempre decía, bueno, nosotros no somos de aquí, nosotros no somos americanos. Like, no te creas, you know? And for me, that was probably one of the most important parts of my identity growing up, being very clear before I was even school age, que yo no soy de aquí, we live here ahora, pero nosotros somos de otro sitio y vamos a volver a ese sitio. And so, para mami era como que no te pegues mucho a esta situación, even though mami todavía vive en Hoboken. And yeah, sí, es muy, pero también es part of the diaspora dream, thinking about your poem, es la realidad que la mayor parte de los que se fueron nunca podían volver. And that is a really heartbreaking reality. So that is the dream, right? Like for those first generations that went out to the diaspora and were raising their children with the hope that we're gonna hacer unas habichuelitas aquí, you know, go back, comprar un terreno, hacer una casita, y ahí vamos a vivir. And then you realize the years, right, that go by, the decades, and they don't get to do that. And I want to share something, sorry I'm talking so much, but I want to say something about Chicago, because I was talking to Billy Ocasio, who is one of the directors of the National Museum of Puerto Rican Art and Culture. And before that, he was an alderman, and I was there recently, and me dijo a mí that when he was, the first time he came to Puerto Rico as a young man, because this is talking about they wanted to retire. He went back to Chicago. He was like, a lot of these people are never going to come home. So what can I do with the little power that I have? And he decided to make a little Puerto Rico in Humboldt Park. And at the very center of the Paseo Boricua is like a residence for mayores, gente mayor de edad. And so you see all these people who get to retire in their community from one bandera to the other, like if they're in a mini Puerto Rico. And I think there's all these creative ways in which, you know, we can go beyond the question, are you from here, are you from there? What do we bring from here? What do we bring from there? How do we bring those things together? And then can I say one last thing? Okay, I'm so sorry. No, porque te toca a ti. Una de las cosas that I think is so important, even la idea de ni de aquí ni de allá, is the question of language. And yo sé que tenemos muchas conversaciones frustrantes sobre like who can speak Spanish, quién no sabe, que si esto, que si no sabe, que si el Spanglish, que si... There's all that stuff, but we could talk about that. But one of the things that I think is so cool, and for me is this mark of diaspora, que para mí me llena el corazón, es que, ¿cómo se dice un mejor amigo en Puerto Rico? Tu pana, tu pana. So I grew up in the diaspora y uno dice, ah, mi pana, tú vas con tu pana, voy con mi pana. Y esa palabra viene ¿de dónde? De la pana, del panapén. ¿Pero por qué? Porque las panas crecen en dos, crecen juntos. So they grow in pairs. And so your best friend is the person that you grow with, right? That's the person that you come up with. And so in the diaspora, for a child to grow up, first, second, third generation, maybe they never saw un palo de panapén, nunca lo vieron. Pero they can be like, mami, voy por la bodega con mi pana. And you could think about the way that our natural environment of Puerto Rico and the experiences of our parents, they influence us generations deep into it, right? And that happens on both sides of the language, because, you know, how do you say the police in 1980s Brooklyn? How do you say? Viene por ahí la jara. Because a lot of the police officers were O'Haras. They were Irish. It was a large Irish, right? A large Irish police force. And so you say, la jara viene, O'Hara viene, ¿verdad? And so these are the ways that I think our language really goes beyond and reveals to us our deep connection to place and the way that we play with them. Okay, ya.
Bueno, me toca a mí, I guess. She looked at me like, this is for you.
Yeah.
No, but I think that I can piggyback a lot of what you said. I also grew up where my parents were like, aquí solo se habla español. And I was also growing up, you're Puerto Rican. There was no this Diasporican, there was no this New Yorican. And I'm from Newark in New Jersey. It was like, you're very Puerto Rican, and that was it. So when anybody tried to contest my identity or that of my siblings, we were like, no, my parents said we're Puerto Rican, even if we weren't born there, right? So I remember like all of these identity battles that you have, whether you meet the first gen or second gen people, and it's like, I'm also not a fan of that. And I also not a fan for the language opposition either. Because I think of Mariposa's poem, right? Like Ode to the Diasporican, where she's like, Puerto Rico, yo no nací en Puerto Rico, pero eso nació en mí, right? And it's like, I felt like that my whole life because I too grew up thinking like, oh, one day I'm returning in a way where I was born somewhere else, but that's still my homeland. That's still my ancestral place. And this idea that even though I don't live here, I do come every year, multiple times a year. And it's like this idea that I am from both places. And I'm also like, because home is here and home is also there, it doesn't mean that I'm not Puerto Rican, right? Or that I have to have this attachment to a certain label. And also, why are you so concerned with that? Right? And it's like, y'all always trying to separate us. We're each other's family. We're each other's, like, we could have much more, I guess, like, productive conversations or like engagement with one another if we let that relajo go. So that's like one thing that you said that I was like thinking about. But also growing up where I was, like thinking of like Chicago being this really big like community, like where I was, it was very Puerto Rican and Dominican. So I had this very naive idea that everybody was Puerto Rican and Dominican. So when I left to college and I met all these people from wonderful places, I was like, oh shit, there's other people too here.
The first Ecuadorian I met, it was right there. And I was like, you're the what?
You don't eat rice and beans? Like,
she was like, I like Colombians. I was like, I don't think I've ever seen one. Where are they?
No, so like, well, actually like mostly in high school where like people were forced to mingle and it was like, you know, more diverse, but we left our little like safe community, right? And so it was like, I thought Selena was Puerto Rican when I was younger because I swear it is like the most embarrassing thing. So, you know, yeah, I guess, and I think it's not really her, but I think it's like when I grew up, like we couldn't speak anything but Spanish at home, but like my dad was the biggest like salsa aficionado, and that's all we heard. Every road trip, every car ride, it was all salsa music. So I can like know who everybody is, but I didn't know what like the Rolling Stones were, and I didn't know any American music. And I would go to school and everybody be like, you didn't watch that movie? You didn't hear this? And I'm like, no, but you know, I could sing you all these songs by like Frankie Ruiz and I could dance salsa. And so when I saw like, you know, the Selena movie and I heard her music, I'm like, this is more Puerto Rican music. And everybody's like, nah, girl, she's Mexican. And I'm like, okay. So it was like this like emergence of like, oh, there are larger histories of migration and diaspora for so many communities, and like that there's so much integration in the United States because like and I feel like with the well, but yeah, I was very ignorant because I thought everybody was Puerto Rican around me. And so I was super proud. I was like, I'm Puerto Rican AF. Who's gonna tell me not, right? And then I remember, this is like a stupid sidebar thing, but Yomaira was my professor in undergrad, the first Puerto Rican I seen. And so I went to all of her classes, right? And I think I've become that professor for some of my students. But when I went to grad school, defended my dissertation and became a PhD, she was like, how do I give you a gift? And she gave me the most Puerto Rican package. You remember? She gave me like all these Puerto Rico stickers, a Lattice notebook because my family's from Lattice, so I had the Lattice bandera, and she gave me like all these little things. She was like, you're so Puerto Rican. And then I'm like, you know what, can you come to my family when they want to have all these discursive debates about like my Puerto Ricanness because I wasn't born there, right? Como si fue me, like my choice, right? But then it's funny because you or like so many other people, you're like, you're my hella Puerto Rican friend. And it's like, see, so it's like, okay, we get it. You want salsa, you want Bad Bunny, ja. But it's just funny because the way you navigate different spaces is like the way you get policed differently or the way you blend in differently. Or like when I'm in San Juan, it's like, tu español un poco diferente. ¿Dónde eres? And I'm like, well, mi familia. No, where are you really from? And I'm like, okay, I'll tell you. But when I'm over there, nobody tells me anything. It's like, oh, tú eres la sobrina de este. Oh, la nieta de Venancio. Yeah, tú eres de aquí. You know? So it's like, even within here, there's so much of that for me when I'm navigating the multiple like regions here. Y ahora yo estoy hablando mucho. So that's me.
Está bien, estamos en la sala. I want to connect a couple of things because there's so much and also so much I relate to, right, from the experiences that you both shared in terms of the identity policing, but also from the other side of hearing like, oh, you don't know Rolling Stones, or you don't know this movie. And I've experienced that a lot too. And then the other side of it, which is the affirmation of the identity, like being around your people, being very firm in knowing who you are, versus getting told, oh, you're not Puerto Rican if you're not born and raised there, right? But it speaks to, well, the other thing that you said is about how we maintain home, right? The retentions that the diaspora has of home, and how we do a really good job wherever we go of bringing a piece of who we are with us. So with that, I want to ask you, Brianna, what from your perspective is a critical part of the diaspora's role in the movements, right? In not just retaining home or retaining culture, but going beyond the retention of aesthetic or of conversation.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I feel like a lot of the times once people they're starting to uncover their roots of being Puerto Rican and they're proud of it and all of these things, it doesn't really go beyond that cultural aspect. We are a political nation, and that is just the reality of a nation that's been colonized for over 500 years and over 127 by the United States. For me, I think the biggest kind of gift that the diaspora has given to the nation of Puerto Rico is in the political struggle. For example, you were just talking about Humboldt Park in Chicago. Oscar Lopez Rivera, who is the longest held political prisoner in Puerto Rico, he was held for over 35 years, most of that time being spent in solitary confinement. He was arrested on these false charges of being part of an armed clandestine group within the United States. Mind you, we have to give a little bit of context to this history. After the 50s happened and the revolution happened in Jayuya and Utuado, and the United States came in, movement was repressed to the point where it felt genocide and slavery. And so understanding that for Oscar Lopez Rivera and for people even like Albizu, who was living in the diaspora and went to Harvard, they understood that this fight for Puerto Rican liberation was necessary because of the things they saw within the United States. And then of course we have, organizations like the Macheteros and other armed clandestine groups that supported in this as well. And then we have the Young Lords, who played a really big role in New York City. And I'm sure you guys could tell me a lot more because of the research and archives that you've done, but an incredible organization, that turned from a gang in Chicago to politicizing Puerto Ricans to be able to fight for the liberation of Puerto Rico. And they always were told, you guys are, you're just diaspora, all of these things, but they were able to pull 50,000 people together, was it, in the Madison Square Garden for Puerto Rican solidarity with all of these different organizations like the Black Panthers, the American Indian Movement. You were there. That was very awesome. The Puerto Rican Socialist Party. Exactly that. Woo! Give it up. Yes. No, of course, yes. The Puerto Rican Socialist Party had chapters across the United States as well. And so being able to understand this kind of level of resistance, I think is super important. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
I think that in bringing up the Socialist Party, which is so important, and we're acquiring the papers at CENTRO of the Socialist Party. But on the side of that, the Young Lords example is actually prime for this conversation because it's an example of a twofold problem. Number one, the work that they did was incredible and insurgent, and it continues to be studied because of what a model it is for how to engage in ethical, community-oriented action. However, they had several internal issues as well as external issues. So one, in thinking about COINTELPRO and the infiltration of the Young Lords that really decimated and felled that organization or that originary organization, but then also the hubris that they had in wanting to organize in Puerto Rico and that return to Puerto Rico. And I think the question of the ethical return, the idea that from the diaspora, we have all the knowledge and tools to understand what Puerto Rico needs to be free. And that is just we're a mess to even think that, right? And so part of that is also the kind of fractious relationship when folks from the diaspora come to Puerto Rico, folks who might not have a connection with family or might be coming in. I mean, I was getting a tattoo recently and of some things, and there was a young guy from the diaspora who was getting some tattoos, and he was getting a tattoo of like Puerto Rico, the map of Puerto Rico with the last names of his family and the places that they were from. But he didn't know too much about it. He was like, yeah, my family really had tobacco plantations in Caguas. And I was like, oh, my family's from Caguas. And he was like, yo, maybe they worked together. And I was like, no, they didn't work together because my family was enslaved in Caguas. I don't actually think you know what you're saying, bro. You might need to like, bájale un poquito, because you're in this place and then you're talking about a particular history that is very painful. And it's like a story of a story, like a family, you could see like it's a family story that gets passed on, and we had all that, and he's like, oh, we had all this thing, we had these tobacco plantations. Did you? Are you sure? Are you sure? Like, and so there's also that kind of question of like, how do we engage? So at the same time that we learn from these really important political organizations, and like we have the models in front of us to replicate this incredible radical practice, and at the same time we have the model of how not to engage with Puerto Rico, with the archipelago, right? As an all-knowing, and we know how to run this, and we have an idea about what freedom can look like. So much of that has to be done in relation here también, ¿verdad? So that's such a great example. I love thinking through the Young Lords because they offer us so much.
Yeah. So there's something I want to transition the conversation into, because something that you said is that as a people, about Pittsburgh, so my bad. We know that they had or have a strong presence of a Puerto Rican community, but there has been a lot of displacement over there, right? So when you said your mom's still in Hoboken, and on the one, yeah, exactly. And on the one side, I'm like, wow, like I love that, because Hoboken doesn't have any Puerto Ricans left, basically, right? And in Jersey City, similarly, we also experienced a lot of the arson and the displacement in downtown Jersey City. And so,
and because it was happening at the same time as the Bronx fires,
yeah,
and that was so big, very few people know about what was happening
exactly
in Jersey City.
Exactly.
So people always say Calabasas and Bronx, which is important because what was happening there was incredible on this large scale, where the mandate was, sorry, I just want to tell you, because it's exactly, the mandate in the Bronx was like, let it burn. The firefighters would sit back and let it burn. In Hoboken and in Jersey City, the firefighters were going in, they were saving people, they were like, but the city itself wasn't funding the support. It was Puerto Rican organizers that were organizing to buy nets for the fire department, because City Hall was like, we can't buy you nets. So you can throw your babies out the window if you want to, we don't care. And so you could read in the archive, like people throwing babies out and like all these things. And the two community organizations, Por la Gente en Cuna, Citizens United Against Arson, were and the first woman captain in the state. And it was because we grew up in the diaspora, in the fires, right? And so she was just like, I'm gonna become a firefighter, right? And like, so for me, that is like also really important in terms of like, how do you respond, right, to the thing that you've seen your whole life happen? Entire families just wiped out. So, sorry.
Oh, so you're speaking to it, right? To this concept of identity as political, culture as a political statement, because of these experiences, I think, for some of the diaspora, right, folks perhaps like you all and like myself, where we feel very strong in our identity, very called to make a statement. It's very necessary for us to show up and say, somos Boricua, raise the flag, because we understand the context of it. But for a lot of communities, even if they don't understand all of the context, right, or haven't lived in communities of displacement or haven't experienced those things, there's still a retention of that. There's still a retention of raise that flag of just like Boricua, but maybe they don't have all of the, like what you were saying about the young man or the gentleman that was getting the tattoo. Maybe they don't have all of it, but there's some retention. And that's what brings us to this idea that returning to, El Archipelago is to return home. So I'm gonna flip us over a little bit to part of why we're here in this series, which is that there's this thing happening, as Mikey said it, right? There's this like concert happening, there's this residency happening, bringing a lot of folks back to the island. And so Keishla, I wanna toss it over to you to talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what does the Bad Bunny residency mean? And is this tied to this idea of political, cultural identity retention? Is this a movement? Is this a fun thing? What, from your perspective, is the significance of it?
Wow, thank you. That's a really great question. That's heavy. I'll say it from my humble opinion. Yeah, a little bit. I think before I get there, and then I promise I will make sense. You were talking about what it means for to experience displacement, but also memory, and what does that mean for communities, and this whole idea of political identity. I think that maintaining memory, right, and fighting against silences and disappearances and displacement is really, really important, right? So you said that you're writing about that, right, and doing these public projects about what happened in Hoboken, because I'm from New Jersey and I'm Puerto Rican. I didn't know about that. Shit happened in Newark too. And I remember some recovery work, right? And it's wow, I've been here my whole life and we don't know this. Yeah. And it becomes this onus on us. And it's chacho, te cargado tanto encima. Every time I find something, I'm oh shit, I gotta write about that. And it's it's not just me, right? But it's all these people doing this wonderful work, but different ways our communities and our people remember what has happened or try to do that recovery work, right? And I think about that because I see in my community, in Newark, there's no Puerto Ricans left, but in the hold up, and it's how do we maintain that, right? So then there's a Roberto Clemente statue in Branchford Park, and it's that's us, right? And there's a flag there. So I think about the ways in which, even though so much time has elapsed, how we remember our communities and our histories. And I know in Massachusetts, Lawrence did this beautiful public art project to permanently place Puerto Rican history there, right? And then you have Paseo Boricua in Chicago, which is amazing. You could not, even though the population has changed, you can see that everywhere, right? So I think for now, people returning here, for Bad Bunny, I think it's important, right? Because I think he provides us the popular culture and the language to attach to something. So for the people who grew up thinking oh, I'm not Puerto Rican enough, or damn, I don't know what I can attach to. There's something that everybody can see and navigate their Puerto Ricanness or how rooted they are and what return means, right? Because is this a return you used to come every summer and this is a sojourn that happens frequently, or is this your first return completely, right? Esta la excusa que tú tienes para venir para acá. And so what it means, how you were talking about the director in Chicago to come and be wow, this is the Puerto Rico my family has talked about, right? So then that's the question. What is the Puerto Rico everybody's imagining that they're returning to, right? What is this idea of nostalgia or this idea of the Puerto Rican nation that he's selling or that he's making us think about that we're returning to? And does it agree or conflict with what you think or knew growing up, right? And so I think in the aesthetic choices and in the way that he's really bringing the Jíbaro to the center, I love, by the way, that's just me, because my family's from El Campo, right? And everybody we're from Jíbaros, right? But it's funny to me because Jibaro was used like in a derogatory way in my family, right? So like in my family, they'd be like, ay, sos tan jibaro, ¿qué tú haces ahí? So to see Bad Bunny kind of like flip that script and like he's using the jibaro imagery and that aesthetic in this way, like I think that that's really important, right? But then there are all these other choices, like you could even see like in everybody's concert choices for their outfits, right? So through these fashion and aesthetic choices, like what version of your Puerto Ricanness are you bringing to the concert? So you see like the modern jibara, you see the linen, you see like the flower, or you see the very sporty urban look or the Puerto Rico jerseys, right? And it's like, I think everybody's like finding something that if they're Puerto Rican, right, that they can hold on to and come with that and be prideful and be happy. And I also think it's in all the choices he's making. So I'm really glad that this conversation is happening after I went to the concert, because then it's like, de que habla ella? But there's something really sweet about like the album itself. If you flip it on the back, it's dedicated to Puerto Ricans everywhere in the world. And he makes all of these comments, and even at the concert, there's like Concho and Jacobo in a blizzard somewhere, right? So all of the people in the diaspora cogiendo frío, right, that you can relate to. That he's like, no, pero todo el mundo es puertorriqueño, no importa donde tú estés, de qué lejos tú estás de la isla, si tú nunca has ido, right? Like, so there's all these ways of like, you can grasp onto something and affirm your Puerto Ricanness. And I think that that's beautiful, right? So I think it's really different than like all of the challenging things of like, ni de aquí, ni de allá, or like how early Puerto Rican literature is like, you have to make a choice, or that Puerto Rican is very white, very this, very Spanish, right? And it's like, you're erasing a lot of people and it's false. So I think that right? So, and he says it, he's like, mi español es así, right? And like now you see people who used to like talk about Puerto Rican Spanish try to perform it now. And it's like, oh, now it's cool. But you made me feel like a certain way a long time ago, right? Or the people like, right? So I think that there's a lot of ways that in old conversations or in old like ideologies that he's disrupting, and that he's letting people sort of cling on to something or like navigate something and also learn more, right? Because people can like say, oh, you don't know your history. Okay, so are you going to help that person out? Are you going to tell them about their history, right? Porque si alguien está ignorante, también es tu culpa, you know? And I remember just always learning so much about Puerto Rican culture at home and having to do that work or homework myself, or have wonderful professors who are like, read this book, Nana, and then come back, you know? So I think like even when you do the immersive experience, like you're learning about Concho, like the sapo, right, and how it's being like in danger of extinction, but you learn so much about Puerto Rican culture in that immersive experience. You learn about it in the concert, like through various performances. You learn it through all of what he's doing, and I think it's this campaign for Puerto Ricanness to be like, no importa que lejos tú estés, like spiritually, emotionally, physically, like there's something that you can get rooted in, and I think that that's what he's doing.
Thank you for that. And there's something I want to get back to, which is documentation that you touched upon and you touched upon. But before I do that, I want to understand from your perspective, Brianna, rematriation, right? Because we're talking about like para los puertorriqueños estén donde estén. But there is a movement and there are a lot of Boricuas de allá afuera que se están mudando para atrás, right? They're rematriating. And what does that look like, and what is the experience, you know, from your perspective of rematriation and the impact of that on the island?
Yeah, so I came back in April, and I know a few people in here have also rematriated as well. And I feel like, I mean, similar to a conversation that was had here a couple of weeks ago, there is an ethical way to go about it, right? Like you don't want to come here with your US salary, you know, displacing people, because that's what's going to happen. And yes, everybody needs to survive, but you can also participate in gentrification in ways that we need to be cautious of. I think also like learning the language, it's really difficult if you don't know Spanish, even just a little bit, or if you're willing to practice it to be here. And also it's not something that we should expect our people to change. I know we're having this conversation in English because a lot of us, that's my first language. And so, but being conscious of that as well. And then I think, what are you going to bring whenever you come back? You can't just come back to like live your best life and go on vacation and be at the beach. Like, what are you doing to fight for our people and to fight for this land? Because that's ultimately what our task is. And as you guys know, there's 7 million Puerto Ricans that are in the diaspora versus 3 million and dwindling here. And it's up to us to be able to come back, to take up space, to take up lands, but like I said, to also fight. And so I think it really just means reconnecting and, culturally, spiritually, all of these different ways, and also politically, of course, and just understanding that we need to come back, whether, whatever way that takes, we need to come back. And in my organization, in DPC, in Diaspora Palante Collective, we have brigades. We actually have one coming up in September, which I'm really excited about. And some people get to come here for the first time. And we do a lot of different things. Like, for example, we do cultural things. So we've been to bomba shows together as a diaspora. We do political things. And so we meet with people that are organizing on the ground here to learn from them. Because like you mentioned earlier, we can't just come here from the diaspora and be like, oh, this is what you guys need to be doing. Why aren't you doing this? Because it's difficult to survive here. And a lot of people are simply just surviving. And so being able to understand, like, okay, let me learn and let me listen. Let me be a student in this space. But let me also give you the lessons that I've learned as somebody that's, been a Puerto Rican in the United States. And so, yeah, having these different experiences, I think, is super important. And being able to connect people, because for some people, they're scared to come back. They might not have family anymore here. They might not, have a reason to come back necessarily. And I think, like you mentioned, the concerts are a good one. And having a reason makes it easier. And also coming back with a group of people that also understand your experience, I think, is super important. So.
Can I answer that? I want to say that I love that you're talking about that return. I also live part of the year here and part of the year back in New York, New Jersey area. And I think it takes a lot of humility to come back home in different ways. I'm coming in, I'm living here in San Juan, in the Santurce. I'm not from Santurce. My family is, all of my family is a family that is a very humble family. Like I said, from the barriada, from two barriadas, from two comunidades especiales, right? I get to have a different kind of life here that I could never have in Caguas and in Vega Baja. And I talk to them. Qué peligroso es Puerto Juan, la hora de metro for them is like, oh my God, So we're talking like campo, right? Yeah, no, exactly, no. All the time. Yeah, pero God forbid, I drive by Miramar. You know what I'm saying? They're like, no, te van a sacar el ojo. Okay, so we're thinking about that, the humility that you have to come in with, take in the experience. And I think also, like, to move back here is also to participate, to support, creating mutual networks of support, figuring out what people, what your skill is that you can share. Like, are you, and participating in different kind of like community and cultural groups, organizations, however you want to, lo que tú puedas brindarle, lo que tú puedas aportar, ¿verdad? And for me, it's like skill sharing. Like, oh, you're working on a grant, or you're working on, you want to do this project? I know, like, yo, give that shit to me. I'm gonna fix that for you. We're gonna do this. We're gonna talk to this person. Let me call that person. Let me figure out a way to help whatever you're doing move forward. And I think part of that comes from a lived experience, but it also comes from this project that I did, Proyecto Palabras PR, after Hurricane Maria, where I was helping to organize Festival de la Palabra, RIP, Festival de la Palabra, but that actually turned into something else. And when they had to cancel Festival de la Palabra, which was the largest literary festival in the Caribbean, that was run by a Black writer, Mayra Santos Febres, doctora, who actually is the director of PR Afro, the first ever Black Studies program in the Caribbean that's here at the University of Puerto Rico. And you should come to Cumbre Afro if you're here in March 17th, 18, 19, 20, at UPR Rio Piedras. That's where Cumbre is going to be this year. It'll be the 5th Cumbre. Sorry, so pause. But after the hurricane, before all this happened, I was working with community organizers here, including everyone who was organizing Festival de la Palabra, and they were doing on-the-ground work in communities, mosquito nets, filters, suicide prevention workshops. They were doing writing workshops, going door to door, people who would lock themselves in the home and wouldn't come out. And around a certain part of the year, Mayra reached out to me and we were sending materials, right? So we were sending actual goods over as best as we could and doing fundraising, poetry, open night mics, all this other stuff in Michigan. I'm one of those Puerto Ricans that like grew up in no puedo seguir. And so we rambled and we wrote like a little mini plans and we did all these things. Us being first generation in the university, we're like, ustedes tienen mucho chavo. Demasiado, de verdad. So, ¿cómo te lo voy a sacar? Right? Like, so you're like, you know, trying to figure that out. And so what we did, we wrote this grant and we were like, you need to give it to us in cash. We need cash. In Puerto Rico, there's no electricity. So the university fought us. We got the money. We got 15 grand in cash. We got ourselves on a plane. And in March, 5 months after the hurricane, we landed and we would like tap in, tap out. They were like, this is what we're doing. These are the communities, blah, 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 blah. And we were like, okay, you rest. We got it. And then we jumped in and we were in Miñi, en Loíza, en Canóvaras, en Cubú. We went to Producir. We were out in Mayagüez and Aguada, Guadilla. We went all over the place. She was a grad student. And I was like, girl, we need you. Come on. We did interviews. And so what we did was like, we didn't want to do research, but we knew that because it was university money, we had to like figure out a way to make this work, right? So we like, we'll do interviews and we're giving out cash. So we're gonna do the mosquito nets, the filters, the this, the that, but also sit with us and talk to us, tell us something or don't. But sign this paper, this thing, we're gonna record this. And so we did all these interviews. So we were giving out money to all of these women and the only people that were there were women and the majority of those women were Afro-Puerto Rican women, which comes to my point about rematriation and coming back home. But what I wanted to say is that during that trip, one of the things that kept on happening was people were saying like, oh, we need books for kids, we need this, we need that. The children are not well oriented on what hurricanes are and how it affects them. And we need children's books that explain the natural phenomena, that explains this so that they can understand it from their perspective. And so we were with a bunch of different folks. We were like, oh, I know somebody who's a writer. I know somebody who's an illustrator. I know somebody. And everywhere we went, like I would wince when someone would say that because they'd be like, no, nosotros tenemos aquí. Aquí hay escritores. Aquí hay diseñadores. Aquí podemos hacer los libros. What we need is help getting the thing done. Don't swoop in and come in here and be like, oh, here's a book. Here's 100 books, here's 10,000 books. It's like, no, we need to be able to keep our young people who are creatives, who are designers, who are doing culture work, who are doing mentoring work, keep them here. And so that's how we developed Proyecto Palabras PR. So I was like, what I'll do is we had this network of community organizers in Puerto Rico, grassroots organizers, farmers. And so we started a study away program. And so we organized it outside of the university. So while they were coming from a university, they were coming into the community. And so each student had a price. I made the university subsidize it because I was like, how could you in this time? And because the kids that would sign up for it were all rich. They had money to come to do a study away, a spring break. And I was like, I don't want those kids that can do that, right? Like they are a mess. I want the kids who are the first generation college students. I want the students that are underserved, historically underrepresented. I went to the office, historically underrepresented students, you're not gonna pay for them to go, they love that shit. So then you go, and then each of the students was paid for. Maybe it was like 3,000 per student. We worked, we housed them in the community, and all the money, we were like, every organization that you visit will get a part of that money. And so that's the way that we're gonna redistribute university funds and make sure that you're visiting, and I was really clear with the students, you're not teaching anything. As a matter of fact, you're gonna sit here, you're gonna be quiet, and you're gonna learn and listen. And part of the way that I think this was so important is like Puerto Rico is at the forefront of ecological and environmental change. If you wanna learn how to survive in the impending apocalypse of this heat and in this like world of like hot oceans and who knows what's going on, Puerto Rico is the perfect place to sit and learn. So how about you learn and you accrue some knowledge and you can support whatever they want you to do. They had this like cleaning stuff, like whatever, it was a lot of stuff. But we ran that for many years and we've continued to do that program. And it's really incredible because you get to bypass things, you get to they have been from its very beginning as, you know, a slave economy. And I'll tell you the many times that I go somewhere, especially here, where I decided that I live centrally located to different things, or people, I will talk to them in Spanish and they'll talk to me back in English. Mm-hmm. Or they'll be like, ¿tú eres dominicana? No, yo soy de aquí, de Loíza. No, fíjate que no. No, actually. And so there's this kind of sense of like a perpetual outsider, this frustration where I can talk to someone. And I was actually had a conversation with someone the other day and I was like buying something. And I know, and then she started talking to me in English, and she was like, ¿y tú eres de aquí? And I'm like, bueno, te estoy hablando en español, con el acento tuyo. Like, because at a certain point, you just get so annoyed at the question, right? You get so frustrated at that kind of you being excised by the color of your skin, which is the foundation of this nation, because there is no Puerto Ricanness without its Blackness. There's no Puerto Ricanness without indigeneity. We could do it without the Spaniards because they just brought us some Spanish, but whatever, but that's not the point. But like, it's that makes the foundation of it. So for me, it's really important that when we have these conversations about returning, to think about the nuance and the kind of embodied experience, right? That one will have and be prepared for that, and also be prepared for the response, because the response that we have to racism allá afuera is not the same that you have here. And you also have to be very careful about if like you are someone who can move easily between the diaspora and Puerto Rico, when you are attending to a situation in Puerto Rico where you could put someone here in danger by virtue of the way that you're responding. And I've had that experience in facing racist things at universities and institutions here where I'm like, con permiso, and my colleagues from the University of Puerto Rico, I'm like, Nena, this is, and I'm like, okay, no, I'll get Gully back in New York. Over here, I'm gonna be genteel. You know, like we gotta figure out a way around the situation at hand. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that into the mix. Yeah,
no, I think that's a really important point. Something that you said that I want to uplift about rematriation is that as diaspora Puerto Ricans, we are fighting the otherness that we experience out there, right? And then we want to affirm ourselves in our identity. And because we're fighting that otherness out there, we don't necessarily realize that when we're coming back, we also have characteristics of living in the US, right? Like we all systems are better. And how many people come back? Ya imposible, because in Puerto Rico, everything is so slow and they don't have good systems and they don't, all the medical, or DMV, it takes forever. And what, like, because the standard is what we experience in the US, right? So it's something that I just want to uplift in that conversation of rematriation, of being mindful that even though we are experiencing all of that otherness, we still are learning a lot of those colonial mindsets, right?
Because you're navigating the like messed up racism there, and then also the kind of system of oppression here, and
right.
Sometimes the approach to face that is not the same,
right? And
then sometimes the way that we come off here could be like one of the things that I try to hear, like block it. I'm like, just nicer. Just
do it, but sweeter.
Whatever. And I'm like, well,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I'm like, excuse me.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? And here I'm like, no, man.
Right. Yes.
Be the peace we want to see in the world.
That is a good point. And then something else that I wanted to uplift was this concept of erasure as a whole, right? Because there are some experiences that are happening here in El Archipelago and outside. And it is the erasure of our identity. It is the active move to push us towards an assimilation or towards another identity. There are lies that we've been told about who we are and how we are. And so I want to open this part up a little bit, and then I think I want to, open it up to the folks in the room to jump into the discussion as well. But I want to talk a little bit about the importance of documentation, because the fact that we can sit here and talk about the Young Lords, and we can talk about the movement in Humboldt Park, and we can talk about all of these very historical and critical moments in our history, is because we have, in part, documentation around it, right? And then to the point that you were making about the Bad Bunny concert or residency, that also is going to be an important piece of documentation in the future, right? This summer is a historical one. This summer probably has seen more returns to the island or to Puerto Rico as a whole than ever before. And this is going to mean something in the future. So when we talk about documentation, what is important, and also, is there a wrong way to go about it?
I just finished talking, so I'm like, sorry. I have a lot to say, but I'm gonna take a break.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. I was busy taking notes and I was just like,
questions.
yeah. And you're always,
Documentation.
Okay.
So like, even if we're just looking at the back, like the importance of documentation, we understand everything that we've been talking about. A lot of it has to do with that we have this documentation to return to understand our identity.
yeah. So that is another big question. I think it's like different types of documentation and what you're looking at and who's documenting and what are they trying to document and for what purpose. I think a lot of like what I learned in this like year at the as a fellow at CENTRO and like what we learned about archives is that the main thing is that they're manifestations of power, right? So like there's somebody who's making like choices as to what belongs in the archive, what deserves to be documented. And with that comes with who and what and like, should be documented, pero y las cosas también, right? So it's kind of like, maybe we can take this as a lesson of like, there's so many things that matter or so many things that are important and so many like facets that he's including, right? That we should also like investigate further to like things that have been erased or things that haven't been, like things that have been marginalized in the archive, right? Because it's like tough to do the work of like the history or like what has happened when there's so much missing. Or so many things are cataloged or documented in the way that like comes from like the politics of the colonizer, right? So like the way that they write about people is so problematic, or the way that they write about certain experiences, or like who's allowed to write or talk about those experiences, right? Like if you're gonna talk about the Bad Bunny concert, right? Who are you going to talk to about that? Is it the tourists that don't know shit, right? Like what it means to be here, right? Or are you going to look at, or like, what does it mean for like the internal migration of like people from all over the islands coming to San Juan to go to that concert as well, right? And also like the economic factor and like all of these other things, right? So I think it really matters, right? Especially like, I was a part of Proyecto Palabras PR, like I was like graciously invited as a grad student. And all of the communities that Yomaira mentioned, like, were never included in the post-Maria, like, narrative, right? And they were all Afro-Puerto Rican communities, you know? And like, all of the community, and that's the thing too, like, all of the labor being done to do this recovery work or just like, assist people medically, economically, or just with resources, like, este no tiene comida. And we're like, okay, scrambling, right? Or like, children need... Yeah, but like just essential resources, right? Pero if you look at like the narratives, like in the media, like through the news, right? Or like the president that was the president at the time, our current president now, he's like, Puerto Rico's fine. They don't need shit there. We should just not give them more money. And it's like, what Puerto Rico are you looking at? If you're just looking at San Juan, right? Or like the metro area, that's a completely different experience to the entire archipelago, right? And it's like where my family was, they didn't have water for a very long time. And they would be like, pero todo está bien, right? They'd be like, oh, like, estamos bien, gracias a Dios. Like, even though, like, they haven't seen fresh water in a long time, because for them to survive, to be alive is just enough, right? So it becomes like that you have to dismantle too, right? But one thing I learned about being at that experience is like, because that was my first return home in a long time. And also like with this, like, a little bit of like the institution of academia, like rooted in me, right? So it was like, I hadn't been home in so long, and so to be like exposed to the places that Yomaira and the trip took me to, I've never seen them in my life, and I've never heard about them because I didn't know that they existed in that way, right? So it's like, we need to get to those places, right? We need to like visibilize those stories, those histories, and include that in the documentation. You can't document the concert or what's happening this summer and just stay in Santurce and Condado, right? Because I'd be like, that's insufficient. And also like even in post-Maria, like, who cared about Vieques? Because nobody talked about them, right? And they're also like metaphorically and like physically like away from the main island, right? So it's like, when we think about that, that's a big example of how documentation had really like, I don't want to say failed us, but I want to say it was done very like in a way.
Example of what not to do.
Right. So that's what I think about documenting. And then my other point with documenting, and I'm probably not so eloquent right at the moment, but it's also, there's different forms of documenting, right? Like, so we think of the archive an institution that I always have like a problem with. And so when I write, I have to remember to be like, I'm not gonna berate the archive or the system. I'm just gonna talk about like what I can do, right? But that's not the only way to document, right? So like, I really focus on like alternative archives, right? Like forms of archiving and documenting that exist outside of like these formal institutions or these institutions of power, and how communities and people archive themselves or talk about like what has happened in ways that like counter the dominant narratives, right? So like, how does music do that? And I think Fat Bunny's doing a fabulous job in like different ways of cataloging like the displacement and the gentrification currently, like in Puerto Tierra and like in the beaches and all that, but it's not enough, right? And that there's other things to do. And I think like music, poetry, oral history, right? Because a lot of what we did, well, I was a small facet, but like it was all this oral history to like document and catalog that, and then they got transcribed and published, right? But that's still so small, right? So it's like, even with like post-Maria, there's so much work to be done, I believe. And then even like with this historic summer, it has to be done in a very ethical and like conscious manner, like thinking about inclusivity and diversity and like the voices and in the modes of archiving or documenting that are being used. Ija.
Thank you for that. That's really great. I pulled this book out because I'm going to talk about something in this book. And I'm so glad it was right on the table. I would have not even thought about it. But I've been writing a lot about the way that Puerto Ricans document themselves outside of the way that they've been documented by others, because that's also a dangerous gambit, right? It's a dangerous game to see yourself through the eyes of someone who doesn't value you as a person and who thinks you have a culture of poverty. And so I was thinking through, there's a professor named Lisa Sanchez-Gonzalez, and she wrote a book called Boricua Literature years ago. And in it, like the kind of conceit of it is that Puerto Ricans are paperless people. It's an amazing book. And she writes about Pura Teresa Belpré and Schomburg and even William Couch Williams and all these other things. But I was always so enraptured by the idea of Puerto Ricans as paperless people. And she wrote about that because she wrote it in that way. She talked about the lack of Puerto Ricans in the archive of the United States. If you go to the Smithsonian, if you like I had 5 heads. When I was like, estoy buscando algo en los archivos ultramarinos de Puerto Rico, del, la colonización, esclavitud, quiero ver los barcos. They're like, esclavitud. La trata de esclavo, what? And I'm like, ¿cómo es que tú crees, señor, que yo estoy aquí sentada hablando contigo en español? ¿Cómo es posible? Brother, my last name is Vásquez, obviously. But you know what I mean? Like, so there's other things. So thinking about Puerto Ricans as paperless people, but then I started to think about the way the Puerto Ricans that I know and how, I mean, look at the Sala, the photographs, the stories, the videos, the home, like all the ways that Puerto Ricans have always documented themselves. We've always done it. We've always known that we love us and that our own histories matter. And we formed institutions. But also, like, I'm thinking about, like, in my family photo albums, you get the birth and you also get a funeral picture. Like, did Tío Jorge die? Yes, he did. There he is, you know, like, en el ataúd, and you're like, whoa, so intense. Okay. And so they're documenting all the things, right? And it was something that I thought was so morbid, but then I realized that I am the inheritor of this beautiful gift of us documenting ourselves and each other. And I've been writing about that in a lot of different contexts, in my own family context, thinking about the arsons in Hoboken, and documenting my own family history through it, finding my family in Vega Baja and tracing them to the plantations where they were enslaved on and the haciendas where they worked, and then tracing their migration to New York. And one of the things that I found in that history was, as I was finding the stories of a very little known family, like my family is not well known at all. Like we don't have the names. We're not, you know, like the majority probably of us in this room, with the exception of who knows what, right? If you're one of those Ferrer, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm so sorry. Okay. But one of the things that I wanted to say about that is that I found that my grandmother, my father's mother, was murdered by her partner in an act of femicide in New York City in the 1940s. It's not documented anywhere. You don't see it anywhere. The only proof, 2 photos from her funeral when she was brought back here. And about 40 years later, 50 years later actually, my cousin Vanessa, my grandmother's great-granddaughter, was murdered about a mile apart from where she had been murdered. In the 1940s. In 1997, Vanessa was murdered. And you think about the diaspora, we think about the kind of back and forth. The violence also travels back and forth, right? That violence that we see here, I mean, just down, go to Fernández de Juncos and you see that beautiful mural by Colectiva Morivivir, Paz para la Mujer, which is a mural about femicide and it's about gendered violence, right? And it's one that folks in the community were against because it showed breasts, even though it was right across the street from a billboard with beer. Right? That was fine. And so and then some people in the community came in, they painted over the mural, they painted panties and a bra on it. And so what did the muralists do? They turned back around and then they asked for photographs of women's breasts and women breastfeeding and all the breasts. And then they made a mosaic over the breasts. So from afar, it looks like it's a censored image. And when you go up close, it's just titties. It's just everywhere. And I'm just like, this is such an incredible response, right? In all these different ways of documenting and making really clear, we see, right, this state of emergency on femicide in Puerto Rico, but we also know that it's in the diaspora. We have these experiences. I also had this really beautiful example, Ebony's Nueva York video, which was directed by René Medrano. I wrote about it for Rican Writings because as I was watching the video, I was at dinner with my partner and our child, and I literally was like, what is going on? Because one of the, René Medrano, who's a photographer, this incredible director, she took really important historic images of Puerto Ricans in the diaspora and then remade them in the video. And one of the images is the image of my late cousin Danny sitting on a car. The four men that are sitting in the car and they're also listening to Trump on the radio, that is a remake of my cousin Danny and his 3 friends in Los Sures. And they're right around the corner from Tomitas, right, on South 4th Street. And she like redoes it and the thing, and I wrote about it. I thought how incredible and I showed my aunt and my cousins. I'm like, look, it's the same picture of Danny that was in a documentary, it was in Los Sures documentary. And so for me, that was really important to say, like, actually, let's think about these images of the diaspora. And I titled the piece like After Images for the Diaspora. And I guess the last thing I want to say about this is I have so much more to say about the way that we document ourselves and how important it is that in this book, actually I have 2 things to say. In this book, I wrote an essay, this is my essay, about Frank Espada's historic documentary project. At CENTRO, I had just opened an exhibition this year called Diaspora, Puerto Rico and the Survival of a People. And it is based on Frank Espada's historic photography project in 1978. He got a grant from the NEH and he did the first ever national photo documentary, social documentary photography of Puerto Ricans. And he went across the US, Hawaii, and came to document and to photograph the returned migrants. But a lot of people don't know that while he was taking the photographs, he was running a tape and he was collecting over 140 oral histories. And his son gave me those. And so over the past 4 years, I've been working with a team of students to clean them up, transcribe them, translate them, and we were gonna kind of activate them. So the exhibition is one way. We're releasing a podcast. We're working with Alona Casanova-Burgess, who did La Brega. We're working with her. So she worked and helped my grad students write their scripts. And we're gonna drop 4 episodes on like Puerto Ricans in Hawaii, Puerto Ricans in Hartford, Connecticut. There is an episode on returned migrants, and there is an episode about Puerto Rican mushroom workers in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. Okay, girl, yeah. Who are also the mushroom workers the Puerto Rican mushroom workers in Pennsylvania are so badass and so radical. It's crazy. And so this is really important. And so in this chapter, I am looking at Chicago specifically. I'm looking at one family that he photographed and took pictures of. In Chicago is the Collazo family, an Afro-Puerto Rican family who found themselves at this crossroads where they wanted to come back to Puerto Rico, but because their son had no kidneys and had to get weekly, 3 times a week dialysis, the doctors in Puerto Rico were like, we don't think that you're gonna get the care that you need here. But the father couldn't get a job in Chicago because he's the one who gave his son a kidney. The son's body rejected it. The father only has 1 kidney. And so he couldn't get hired anywhere when he would go for a physical exam. And so you'll find in this family. And for me, the kind of, the chapter that titles A Pesar de Todo, because it's really the wife who talks so much. And you can see the children and he's photographed them in their backyard. And, you know, at the very end of this, she goes, you know, a pesar de todo, I'll read it to you. So the mother says, gracias. Nosotros le damos la gracia a usted también por la entrevista, que a pesar de todo ha sido de nuestro agrado. Y qué bueno compartir con alguien, ¿verdad? Cosas. This interview is very sad, so I'm just remembering the things. Problemas que uno tiene. Y es una oportunidad de expresar lo que sentimos y esto. Así que estamos a la orden y cuando quiera volver a repetirse, aquí puede volver. And then he offers them to take them to the UKU to watch, to look at the photographs. Because they do the interview, they're like, what is this? And he's like, estamos documentando a ver si a través de esto las cosas se mejoren para nuestra gente. That was his goal. And these interviews from the late 1970s, early 1980s are so important for us right now. I teach them whenever I can. I'm doing all these projects. I want to bring them to the public because so much of these histories are the things that we are living and we're living them over and over again. And we have them in our own families. And then the last thing I'm going to say about the residency is that over the course of this residency, I've had 10 of my cousins come stay with me. And then they, in turn, got 8 more people to come stay in Caguas and in other places because it was like, oh, tú te vas, yo también me voy. And I'm like, bueno, todito no caben en casa, so relax. And so it was, yeah, no hay cama para tanta gente, sí. Entonces, and the other thing that happened, it was also allow people to reconnect with family members who they had not talked to in decades. And really trying to bring things together in ways that was very unexpected. I expected people to come in, go to the concert, and go back. But instead, something else opened in their visits here, and it shifted completely their relationship with Puerto Rico in a way that I did not expect. And I was like minding my business. You know, like I was like, I don't know, but yeah, lo tuyo, aquí está en la silla de la playa, y tú allá, and have a good time, you know? I'll take you out to dinner one night, but I have to write my book, you know? And so, but then I realized how transformative it was. And so I'm really excited to hear and to see whether this, the residency for Puerto Ricans who are coming back and come with family and maybe come in a different way, maybe if they're also transformed by the opportunity to come back. And now I really talked for too long. Okay.
I have one more thing. With the question of documenting, I think because you phrased it around Bad Bunny's residency, that it didn't make me think about like what I wanted to say before. You said that your family has always taken pictures and always had these albums, right? And I think that there's a call to that, right? Debí tirar más fotos. I should have taken more pictures, right? There's this like regret and this idea that like we need to photograph more, but not in the like stupid, aimless, like just for social media and like a selfie, right? It's like these like intentional photographs, right? And like with the film that he released, right? The guy goes back to a box of photographs. And it reminds me of something I did when I was younger. Like you kept everything you wanted to remember, or like it was a keepsake in a box, right? And you put it under your bed, you put it somewhere. And I remember like, yeah, that's a tradition that I've always had. And even now with like my Polaroid camera, I'm like, I'm very intentional about what I want to capture, right? And I think that there's this call to like create your own family archive, right? So like whether it's like, because what I think is really special is that there's this universal message, like even though you're not Puerto Rican or if you are Puerto Rican, right? It's like, debí tirar más fotos de la gente que importan, de las memorias que quiero, like, you know, remember. I want to remember this one day. And so I think it's not just all of us, it's a call outside of Puerto Rico too, to be like, what is it that you want to remember at the end of your life, right? Or that you want to share with somebody, or that like, it's really special that in the film, like he's sharing it with Concho, right? That's his best friend. And he's like, oh, these are memories that I have, even though I don't have a lot of pictures, I want to share them with you. And I think that there's this intimacy, right? In like memory making and in documenting that is there. And like your photographs were all family, right? And it's this way you learn about your own family history. So I think that there's this like really big call to like, you should take more photos, you should be more intimate with one another, but you should also share them, right? You should store them, share them. And also on the other side of that, like he's talking about disappearance and silences. It's like, because if you don't take them, you know, we're getting erased. And like with the physical displacement, right, and all these other forms of erasure, they're a way to counter all of that. Because with the family photographs you have, you were able to prove, and like, yeah, sorry. It goes to what you're saying, and you're saying too, but go ahead. I will just give you the mic. No, but I think it's also like, and I hate saying this, it's our evidence. You know, it's not just our evidence that we live, but it's like, despite the archival record that erases us or doesn't even include us anyway, or other people, right? It's like, no, I know that this happened because my abuela had this photograph, or there's this scrapbook, or this album, or like this faded picture somewhere. And it's like what you need in this time, right? So I think that there's something very poignant about like, yo, they're taking over our land here, and like there's all this like infrastructure, like literally taking people out, but he's telling all his viewers, like, create your own photographs and keep them and then share them with your people, right? And then that also becomes like an oral history. That also becomes like, you can do whatever you want, but I still have this, right? And I think that that is really like at the heart of his message, right? Not just the residency, like a concierto, but it's at the heart of the campaign of Debí tirar más foto, and it's everywhere, right? And this is like the last thing I'll say, but at the concert yesterday, right before he sung like that whole set, he was like, I want you all to put your phone away. And it was like, just live this moment now and make it a memory, and then think about it later. And it's like, because todo el mundo está tan preocupado, they're like, let me Instagram this, or let me post this on my story, or let me share this, or whatever. But it's like, he was like, let's go back to like los 80, los 90, algo así. And it was like, let's just live. And it's like, yeah, you can't make a memory if you don't live it, right? So then it's also like, be mindful and conscious about how you're cataloging and when you're cataloging, right? Because not everything needs to be like live streamed or like, so documenting is like this conscious choice, but it's also our evidence. It's also like our family histories, and it's also like vital for our continuation, like in many ways. Anything you want to add?
Yeah. And I do want to check in with Mikey on the time.
Oh, sorry. We could just keep talking.
I don't want to get other folks.
I'll be super brief. I think to the point that you made, just in terms of like, we don't document these things out of, well, we do because we want to, but it's also out of necessity. And I think whenever there's like repression that we have to go through, we have to document these types of cases. And like you said earlier, like the point of the media writes our narratives for us. And so if we're not documenting these things, and we can see this, like I said, happening in Palestine right now, who are the principal people that are documenting this genocide? It's people on the ground because they have to. There's no choice. Exactly. And so, you know, journalism and archival work and all of these things that you guys are doing, that is such incredible, like a necessity that we really need to document our struggle and to document the history of our people, and also documenting in real time the repression that we're facing. We see people right now actively recording, for example, the kidnappings that are happening by ICE. We wouldn't know that's happening unless it wasn't for the people documenting these things. Same with police killings, same with all of these different things. We have to be the ones to document it. Of course, we have to do more than just documenting. We need to prepare ourselves to fight back, but at the same time, it's documenting these things to show them to the world, because it's important and our stories matter. So
yeah, and I just wanted to say one quick thing about it is like structural is also like our national politic, the Puerto Rico national project is also like, I'm gonna bring this back to questions of race, is also deeply intent on whitening. Puerto Rico is the whitest nation in the Caribbean, which is fighting with Cuba for that role. They really want that, they really want it. But I think like that, ese lío, right? Ese lío, esa mentira, ese all of that is part of our documented, like our national paperwork, right? And for me, doing this project and what you're talking about, which is like, I'm looking at my family history, Vega Baja, enslaved people who are trafficked from Africa after the abolition of the slave trade itself. And I trace back how in my father's death certificate marks him as white, as a white man. And my father is a Black man, descendant of enslaved people, right? And so for me, it's really important because these photographs, right? I could be like, oh, era Don Santo. That's what you're talking about, right? Like, this is not a white man. But the nation is so deeply intent on this, right? And that in our documents, in the census, and by the way, the next census that's coming up is extremely important because they're changing the categories. I feel like a crazy person right now. Because they're changing the categories and they are going to make ways for not to count us. And so just keep an eye out. We're starting in 2026, the work and the campaign to try to work with the OBS. Anyway, so, but I want to say that the main question here is like, you cannot trust anyone else with your own history, with your own intimate family history. That is something that you have to take up on yourself. Talk to people, ask questions, ask the same person the same question many different times. Yeah. And CENTRO has a creating your own family archive, like PDF that you can follow. We do workshops in New York, both family archive, community mapping, but you can look it up and, you know, in terms of like, how do you maintain and keep your materials? You should have of important photos, 3 copies, a digital, a physical copy, and another physical copy in a different location, right? So thinking about these kinds of things, sorting materials, trying to figure out what kinds of stories you can tell through that. Talk to people, and even if they contradict each other, that's the best part. Yeah. I have one person, I did a bunch of interviews for this book, and there's one tia that I never met who passed away before I was born, and guess what? Ella era bien mala, horrible. And there's all these stories about her, and not one person told me a nice story about her. I'm intrigued by this woman. I'm obsessed with her. I'm like, she was terrible. Tell me more, right? Like, no one has and I keep going, and like, I'm like, one day I'll find someone to say a nice thing about her. I haven't yet. It's been years, and I can't. Like, I'm just so enthralled by the complicatedness of our families, about the stories, and the fact that you are the only one that can tell the history of your family from this locus of enunciation, from the place where you are, right? You're the only one. It's so important. And it also, that is a radical act that undercuts, right, the conservatism, the desire for whiteness, right, and the desire for you to lead this nation. It undercuts the national project, which is part of a larger set of things that we need to enact, is knowing ourselves and knowing our own history, knowing the righteousness through which we have el deber de estar aquí, you know? Anyway, I'm done.
Yeah, no, that's an important point. That's an important point, because how do we talk about diasporic identity? How do we talk about identity as Boricuas without knowing where we come from?
Yeah,
So
when I found that plantation, you can't tell me nothing. No one here, no one allá, nada.
That's right.
Not one,
Yeah.
I don't care.
That's right.
But I think for me, that's important, is that once you understand your history and you know that, you feel so deeply empowered and indebted to the land itself.
Yeah.
And so no one can de aquí y que.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Well, then nice.
And it's not just for you that matters. It's for the next generation.
Absolutely.
Right? It's for the next generation. Exactly. All right. We have a few minutes left, and I want folks to jump into the conversation with questions or just like something that resonated with you from anything that any of these panelists said.
I already showed this to Yomaira, but we agreed that I would, and this speaks to the issue of intergenerational. You know, people are coming back to Puerto Rico now, but people have been coming back to Puerto Rico for a long time, because we left here many, many years ago. So I'm part of that other generation. And it's important to know the stories of all our generations, because they build us and they take us to where we are today. To the extent that we miss part of that, we miss a lot. This photo is from the 30th of August, 2017. And this was at a march against La Junta, which had just been put in the year before, 2016. And a group of us, my participation was that I had returned to Puerto Rico after retiring and living 63 years in New York. But I had been coming and going from New York to Puerto Rico since I was 16, okay? And part of it was because I was politically involved with the issue of Puerto Rican independence in New York, and with Aspira and Antonia Pantoja, who was my mentor in life. So this was a picture of us when I came back in 2014, a group of us who had returned to Puerto Rico and had been activists in the diaspora. We got together and we said, we got to create a group here that represents our experience, you know, basically it was mostly New York and New Jersey. And so, as I mentioned to Mariposa, we took the name, the Diasporicans. And we marched with this banner in that march, and it was such an outpouring of love from everyone that was there, because people identified, and I think that that's an important element to be brought to this discussion. La lucha continúa, and it's been going on for a long time, y todos tenemos historia, y es importante que esas historias se hagan y se cuenten y se lleven a todos los sitios que se tengan que llevar. So not only the writing of family histories, but our memoirs and our autobiographies, because nobody else is going to write it. So that's...
And so they not forced me. Here on like writing your Puerto Rican memoir.
Wow. I thought you had forgotten, but that's why I love you, Yomaira.
Gracias.
Okay, I'm gonna try to remember everything because so many things were covered that I'm so. Coño, my heart is racing so fast porque no me gusta que la gente me grabe, no me gusta hablar en cámara, pero está bien, no te apures, como que voy a pichar, voy a intentar de pichar. I am the great granddaughter of a Puerto Rican nationalist who left Puerto Rico. My heart is racing out of my chest. In the 50s, after he got arrested, durante la revuelta de los 1950, and I never really thought about that. I never really it's stories that I always heard growing up. I'm from the South Side, I'm from Williamsburg, I'm from Los Ures. Have admired Hope Street, ya tú sabes. Pero nada, ya yo tengo como 6 años aquí y vivo en Santurce. And I never really think about that stuff. And actually, Christopher Gregory that did el libro Tu Gobierno Te Odia, he was the one that told me, tu abuelo tiene, o sea, mi bisabuelo, que era el nacionalista, tiene una carpeta. Y yo, en verdad, so I go and my friend Iwan works there. So I'm like, Iwan, mira, and they were trying to tell me al principio que la carpeta de él no existía. Y yo estaba como que, mira, pero esta persona me dijo que sí. Pero ¿por qué no me dijiste que conoce a fulano? Ven, pasa. Y yo, pero hello, si no fuera por eso, no iba a saber de la carpeta a mi abuelo. Pero nada, that's where I find out that he got arrested in 1950s. He lived in Puerta de Tierra with my grandmother and with my great-grandmother. And so, nada, durante todo ese tiempo, como que I come from that, and I've always, my grandfather in his carpeta is very clear about freedom for all nations. Puerto Rico, obviously, but freedom for all nations. So I grew up with this deep-seated, socialism in my family, born and raised all of my life. I say all this to say that now I'm in a fight, right, against gentrification here in Puerto Rico, in Santurce. And you guys were talking a lot about documenting, and I don't document a lot because I don't like to talk. Obviamente no me gusta que me graben, puñeta, que me están grabando de todos lados y yo tengo lo odio, estoy temblando fuerte, no me gusta hablar, ay Dios mío. And I'm supposed to speak next week about gentrification, and I'm just I told Mikey, let's do a full conversation porque no me gusta como que esto, my hand is shaking so hard. Pero nada, el punto es que, there are little things that are always happening, right? The person that wants to buy the property is right next door. So, I live on the same block that the person wants to buy, displace people so that he can make it into an Airbnb. So my neighbor is the Airbnb person that wants to displace all of these people. And I share that because every day, the tenants call me about something, as if I was their landlord, and I'm not. I'm just an organizer from the community that is trying to stop displacement. And so, every time the phone rings and I hear about something, my heart sinks, and today there was a moment where, a few days ago, the guy was harassing the tenants by bringing people to contractors and stuff to talk about the project in front of their house. Como que you could have this reunión en tu casa, pero tú prefieres hacerlo en frente del apartamento de esta gente. Como que you know what you're doing. So what he does now is he tells his guests that, that's the property I want to buy. So now all the guests, when they pass by, are always looking into their house. So it makes them feel like zoo people. So now my phone is filled with pictures of all these tourists just looking up at this woman's house and at these people's house and of the guy, whatever. And he notices now that we're documenting. Pero el punto es que I don't document myself talking about the things that we're going through. So today there was a moment where she called me to tell me that there were guests outside of the house, pointing at the house, taking pictures, all this stuff. So I told her, Rosie, documenta, whatever you can. And she goes, I'm leaving, but I called the guy next door and he's going to document, while we're gone. So everybody's kind of watching while we're gone so we can go to la oficina de permisos to try to get his Airbnb permisos revoked. But I say all that because today she said to me, I have hope this is going to happen. And to be honest with you, I didn't think it was going to happen. And we raised a lot of money that I'm really grateful that we were able to do, thanks to Gabby and other people that were willing to talk about what was happening. But it's una lucha que estamos bregando todos los días. Y como yo vengo de los sures, and I already saw this one time, it's so deep in me that that ra-ra-ra that you were talking about, I'm very New York. So I had to learn that 6 years ago with my ex-partner, him and I are still cool. But he used to be like, Nikki, bájale. Because he's from here. Y él está como que, Nikki, cálmate. Y yo, no, because I get real And then I realized, like, oh, wait a minute. Like, and now I'm like, now the thing is, mira, lo que pasa es, and then you learn how to, like, you're like, inside you're exploding and you're about to be like, yo te voy a decir, like, and inside you're like, mira, lo que pasa es que lo que tú me estás diciendo no cuadra, you know what I mean? And then you learn how to fight. Right. Y cuando me dijiste, you know what I mean? Pero nada, hablé un montón, way more than I wanted to, but thank you for reminding me to document.
Hey. Oh, my bad. My name is Gabby. I wanted to contribute something to Yomaira. Something that you said. I remajored. I just made a year here, yay, on August 10th. And I think, well, I also lived here for 6 months in 2023. But I also felt so out of place. I felt like you never Puerto Rican enough and this and that. Unlike probably a lot of you guys, I grew with literally nothing. I'm half Colombian, half Puerto Rican, and my Puerto Rican side is from Chelsea, but they're also white. And literally walked into that house. All I smelled was pastel, carne guisada, pollo guisado, but no Puerto Rican flag, no salsa, no music, no spirit. There was no like umph in that household. All the umph came from my Colombian side, but even there, retaining culture wasn't like a thing. So I grew up with a very New York Latino experience, I guess, but with none of the culture. So the fire, the umph, like the this, the that, like the communication, right? All those different things. But when I got here, I was like, you want to be the closest thing to being from the island. And I was like, I don't feel that. Like, I can never match that. You're not from here though, but you're not from here, but you're not from here. But you said something of, once you learn that history, or once you just take ownership of that part of yourself, everything gets brushed off, right? And I always say, like, I spent most of my life in Jersey, and then spent the last, like, Teaneck, yeah. And then like school years, and then spent the last like 7 years in the city in El Barrio. And I always say, and that's when I started getting involved with like meeting Brianna and Jeremias and all these different people in the diaspora who do work in activism and learning my history. And I would say New York taught me how to be Puerto Rican. Like, New York taught me how to be Puerto Rican. I'm close with Toñita now, and like all these different things, all these different people. And it was just like, once I took ownership of that, you could be like, yo, like, you're not from here. And I'm like, all right, but what do you need from me? Like, use me as a resource. I'm here for you. I don't care that you don't like me or you're trying to push down my identity, but I'm here. I know my history. I know I'm from here. What can I contribute to what's happening here? And so, like, I think recently people have been asking me, you know, what's been the hardest part about, or, you know, what was the hardest part? Like, what's the advice that you can give, you know, if I want to come back? And I'm like, dude, just own the Puerto Rican that you are, like, whatever it is. And I think that sentiment, especially being communicated right now with Bad Bunny, is just like, no matter where you're from, whatever. And it's just like, you don't have to try to be anything, because at the end of the day, we got the same goal. And that made me feel really good to finally be in the room again and feel home and be like, damn, like, all right, like, we back. Like, it's good, because we go off our separate ways now, and it's just like, but we got this fire again. And it's really nice to have that. And it was funny, like, you say, I kept laughing every time you kept saying, like, you know, like, we gotta chill with how we react here, right? Which is true, because it's different. And then I forgot what somebody said to me. I don't know if I conjured this up, but I was just like, I mean, I would be angry too. Like, we're not supposed to live a life like that. Our bodies, our DNAs are supposed to be where we're from, right? And like, you take these people out of their environment, and it's fear, and it's then add on capitalism, add on racism, all these different things. And especially I have that fire with my Puerto Rican side, because they literally don't talk to me because I'm the browner one out of my family. And my mom's an indigenous Colombian, and they just like just push me off. And I'm angry, I'm tight, I'm all the time. But now I'm here and I'm like, all right, let me just live the life I was supposed to live. and we're gonna figure things out together. And like, like it's the struggle. It's just what it is. So I think all these different things coming together and how we react to different like things. I don't know. Coming back, we hone into the human that I feel like we're supposed to be. Yeah, but I mean, I do miss that fire sometimes. So yeah.
Bueno, mi gente, I think that's about time. I want to say a thank you to all of you for bringing the energy to the room and for participating in the conversation and listening. I want to thank Yomaira, Keishla, and Brianna for all of the insights and knowledge and wisdom that you all shared. And thank you, Mikey, for hosting and creating this space. Oh, one quick announcement.
Tomorrow, if you haven't heard, now you know, tomorrow we're going to be marching for independence. So everybody please meet at 10 a.m. at the south side of the Capitol in Viejo San Juan. As it marks, as you mentioned, the implementation of La Junta. This is going to be 9 years since the implementation of La Junta, which has completely destroyed Puerto Rico in so many ways. So it's really important that you guys show up if you can for the March for Independence tomorrow, 10 a.m. Viejo San Juan, lado sol del Capitolio.
One last announcement, sorry. Today, 5 o'clock at the Museum of Contemporary Art, El MAC, is right down the street. There is a fundraiser for Dominican women. So in terms of thinking about solidarity here, anti-ICE, there's gonna be, and Dominican communities here in Puerto Rico, specifically in Barrio Obrero and in the Santurce area, have been deeply targeted by ICE. And I'm really excited to hear Digna told me about it because Digna is with it, okay? Digna is in the streets. So I think the other thing I'm gonna just let you say is like, for the young activists, connect with our older activists, the ones that are still active here in Puerto Rico who have got connections and knowledge and so much lived experience. It makes, it just smooths our path to take that knowledge seriously. So thank you, Digna, for letting me know about that fundraiser. I hope folks can join at 5 o'clock at the MAC.
Beautiful.
Chévere, pa'lante, gente.
Thank you all. Kick it, grab some cafe, lo que sea. Check out the exhibition. We got DJ Ramos from New York blessing us with the tunes. And yeah, your ass might be shooken. So